Good morning, everyone. Hope everyone is feeling well and good. Okay, today's is a special class. Actually, it was regarding case discussion, but due to sudden change of plans, we have shifted to the examination of nervous system examination part. Okay, so there won't be any discussion of a case today, but you have to, this class is very, very, very important. Okay, so examination of nervous system, each person who enters the viva will be touching the nervous system because the examiner will be asking you, even if you won't get a long case of nervous system, you got a CVS or GIT or respiratory, basically nervous system you cannot miss because they'll ask you in some or the other way, okay, wise spotters wise or anything wise. So examination part, it comes with how many times you see, because since you are not exposed to patients as of now, just please kindly examine this on your at your home or on your friends and then try, okay, because the hand skill, see, when they ask elicit the plantar reflex, you should be able to just not stand like dumb, okay, just take that whatever is required, a key or that back part of the knee hammer, and then just elicit that method. Anything, anywhere they ask in examination of nervous system, you should be able to say. The spontaneity should be good. So for that, you have to go for the examination. As of now, because you are not being exposed to patients, please kindly examine in your home people. Okay, so let's start. Okay, so today I'll be discussing the whole nervous system can't be completed. It's a very vast topic. So today the initial two topics I'll be discussing. So what all the major section? History part, you'll be familiar by now. You should be familiar. Even though you're not familiar, please kindly read the neurological section of the history part. Okay, what is the relevance of what you'll be asking on the history of the patient? Okay, so what are the topics we'll be considering in the examination of the main system, nervous system? You'll be seeing the mental status. These headings should be on the tip of your tongue. Okay, when examining, when you are presenting, these headings should be on the tip of your tongue. Okay, first, mental status, examination of cranial nerves, motor system, sensory system, reflexes, cerebellar functions and the coordination tests, gait and stature, and any abnormal movements. And the other heading is also there, examination of back and spine. Okay, head and spine. So today I'll be discussing about the mental status and the examination of cranial nerves. Okay, the rest topics will be considered in the consecutive weeks. Okay, so this will be nothing but brushing of your knowledge. You have already presented the cranial nerves, I guess. So I'll be brushing your knowledge. Okay, mental status examination. So it is important to analyze the patient's intellectual early in the examination, since this is helpful in subsequent investigation of symptoms. For example, if the patient's memory is deficient, only a limited value can be attached to his account of his illness or the state of his previous health. Okay. But if he's comatose or unable to understand speech, any attempt to investigate the state of his sensory functions are likely to be frustrated. So that's why you go for initially how the appearance and the behavior and how much level of consciousness the patient is. Comatose or stupor patients cannot be examined. There you can examine on the bed, but the other examination like speech or memory or orientation you cannot examine. Okay, so depending on the state of the position of the patient, the mental status examination varies and the consecutive headings also. Okay, so what are the things which you'll see in mental status examination? You'll see for the level of consciousness, as I have mentioned before, attention and concentration, orientation, speech and language, memory, calculation skills, logic and abstractions, tests for agnosia and apraxia, judgment and insight. So in these all headings you're supposed to be knowing. In these, your UG level of consciousness, attention, until the 7 topic you have to be able to say. Okay, while presenting the case, you will say it in a sentence form. I told you, na, history, a 54-year-old male patient presented. Similarly, like that, mental status exam, these headings are you will be writing in your case sheet, but while presenting it, you'll be presenting it in a sentence form. Okay, so until the topic 7, logic and abstractions, you should be able to say, you should know the detail of how you'll examine the patient or what you will elicit in the patient after your examination. Okay. So only 2 possible questions the examiner will ask you. Headings, if you say correctly, they'll say examine the patient and show. That spontaneity is important. After you examine the patient, they'll ask what did you elicit? What will you elicit from the examination? And then they'll ask you what are the possible conditions. So this is how you will prepare for a case study. Okay. So appearance. So first topic I will discuss about is appearance and behavior. Okay. Note whether, so the what will you see in the appearance and behavior, patient actions while lying in bed are important. Note whether he is unduly disturbed or in a state of terror. Does he show a reasonable interest in his surroundings? What is the condition of his hair, his beard, his nails, his hands? Then note whether he talks normally or he's mute or answers only by monosyllables. La, pa, ka, like that. Not a sentence. Okay, there is no complete sentence of only monosyllables, or he is over talkative. Okay. So from this you can evaluate either the neurological manifestation or the neuropsychiatric evaluation also. Okay, whether the patient is malingering or is it really a genuine disease. Okay, so that indicates appearance and behavior. Then coming to the emotional state. Okay, here it is important to note his mood also. Okay, so what will you see in emotional state, whether he is happy or distressed? Is he happier than the condition which would wear, that is elated or euphoric? That is what you'll derive from it. Euphoria is a feature of general paralysis of insight. Is he depressed? Either he's happy or is he depressed. Gross apathy. Suppose there is a depressed patient, you'll feel can push it over to psychiatric illness. No, because gross apathy towards surroundings is a feature of Parkinsonism. Okay, there'll be no expressionless face. There won't be any expressions in Parkinsonism. Whether there is a flattening of emotion. Okay. Then we go to the delusions, whether there will be any delusions or not, false beliefs which continue to be held despite evidence to the contrary. This may be secondary to the hallucination. So these are the psychiatric definitions are important. Examiner might ask you what is delusion, what is hallucination, what is delirium. So you have to, what are delusions? They are false beliefs which continue to be held. Okay, the patient believes in something even though you convince him that it is not there. Okay, so delusions are false beliefs which continue to be held despite evidence to the contrary. Okay, even if you give him evidence, he won't believe. That is delusion. Hallucinations are false impressions arising from special organs, that is, hearing hallucinations, visual hallucinations, or olfactory hallucinations. Like, suppose some object is placed, they'll be smelling something else. Okay, either that, or whether the object is not there, also the smell will be mistaken. Okay, so auditory and visual hallucinations are common. If visual hallucinations occur, they are of organic in nature. Auditory hallucinations are usually due to schizophrenia. Okay. How will you see the orientation to place and time? Okay. What will you do? You'll be asking the patient about the place where he is being examined. Where are you? Can you recognize the place where you are? Patient might say hospital, or he might say I'm at home, though even if he is at hospital. So that is what you'll ask, the place, or if the patient's attendants are there, who is this, how is he related to you? Okay, those are the reason. So orientation to place and time, what time of the day, depending on this. So orientation to place and time, or whether any questions regarding intellectuality, you have to ask based upon the level of education. That is very, very important. Most of the patients which you come, the education level, I'll discuss about the MMSE score, then you will be understanding. Okay, so UG level, you need not ask the MMSE score, but sometimes in Viva the examiner will ask about the MMSE score. While presenting, you need not present it. Okay, no need to go into the details. You will say whether the patient is educated or non-educated. Okay, then examiner will ask you what is the score. How will you score it for educated and non-educated people? It varies for the graduates and super graduates and undergraduates and all. Okay, I'll tell you. So orientation to place and time, you'll ask the patient about the place where he's being examined, then you'll say whether he can, then you'll assess whether he can tell the date approximately, if not perfectly. Okay, can he tell the approximate time without looking at a watch? Approximately. Okay, now it might be like that. Okay, then you test for the level of consciousness. Actually, this level of consciousness you will be initially seeing, and then the other headings can come, or you can put this level of headings in between. Okay, so whether the patient is fully conscious, or whether there is any presence of clouding of consciousness. Okay, what is clouding of consciousness? Clouding of consciousness or lack of awareness may occur in many physical. Yes, 41. What is your doubt? You can ask your doubts after the class. Okay. So patient is fully conscious, or the clouding of consciousness or lack of awareness may occur in many physical illnesses with or without specific symptoms. Okay. So it occurs as a symptom of cerebral lesion, but also a variety of infective and metabolic disorders. Various grades of clouding of consciousness is seen. These are nothing but stupor, semi-coma, and coma. So I have discussed about the definition or the detailing of these. This might be asked in the Viva. What is stupor? It is a state of clouding of consciousness from which the patient cannot be fully aroused, but he may open his eyes or show his tongue on vigorous, or what is the vigorous or painful stimulation you'll give? Either you'll pinch him like this on the leg or lower limbs, or the upper limbs, or anywhere possible. You'll pinch him, or you'll press hard on the sternal press like this. Okay, then the patient, how he'll react. So in stupor, the patient is unconscious, but he'll be fully aroused by the painful stimulation, or when if you ask the patient to show his tongue. But the response is relatively late. This is stupor. Okay. What is semi-coma? This is a state in which patient is unconscious to such an extent that ordinarily he is not aware of his surroundings, but he responds to painful stimulus by groaning. So in this patient, if you ask him to show his tongue or just turn your face, he won't do that. Okay, he just responds to painful. Same thing, you pinch him, and then or you press the sternum like this, he'll be groaning, and or he'll be just shoving your hand away, or if you pinch his hand, he'll be shoving or withdrawal. So this is semi-coma. What is coma? This is a state in which patient makes no physiological, no response. You, how much ever stimulate pain stimulus, there is grading of pain stimulation, but that is not that important for you. So the patient makes no physiological meaningful response even to external stimulus or inner need. Okay. So depending on this state of reaction, whether he gives a response or non-response or in midway, the following has been created: Glasgow Coma Scale. This is very, 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 very important. GCS scoring. Okay. No examiner will skip from away from the scoring. Okay, the scoring is very important. You are supposed to know these headings you are seeing here. These three should be by heart, because in clinicals also you'll be examining the case like that, depending on the, since you won't be given any unconscious patients for examination, but still this Glasgow Coma Scale will be repeatedly asked. Okay, so what are the three things you'll see in the patient? Eye response, verbal performance or verbal response, and motor response. So based on these three factors, the Glasgow Coma Scale was designed. So why is it used? As I told you, the depth and duration of coma and impaired consciousness to assess this. Okay. It helps to gauge the impact of wide variety of conditions such as acute brain damage, any condition of CVA, to traumatic or vascular injuries or infections, no, metabolic disorders, like even metabolic disorders like hepatic or renal failure, where there is hepatic encephalopathy or HIE. And these conditions also you need the Glasgow Coma Scale, or any hypoglycemia, diabetic ketoacidosis condition. Anywhere the patient is unconscious, this Glasgow Coma Scale, depending on the level of consciousness, it is required. So this is very important. So remember, eye opening response, verbal response, motor response. So how will you remember? I'll tell you an easier way. See, eye response is 4 points. Next is 5, best verbal. Motor is 6. So remember like that, 4, 5, 6. So you go in the descending order. So eye opening response, if he is obviously descending order, if he opens he responds very good, then the score will be high. Okay, so go from 4. So there is no confusion in this. So when they ask Glasgow Coma Scale, don't start saying 1, 2 or 3, might be 4. 4, 5, 6. 4 starts. So how eye response will start? Spontaneously. If he responds, if you give the pain stimulation and the patient, or you ask the patient to open his eyes or do something and he opens his, spontaneity. Score is 4. To speech, okay, it is 3. Again to pain, it is 2. When there is no response, it is 1. What about verbal response? If you ask, as I told you before, when you ask about the time, place and person related to that patient, he is well oriented to that, the score is 5. If he's confused, he doesn't know what day it is, or this person, I don't know him, that comes under 4. If he doesn't speak anything, like inappropriate words, the words doesn't make any meaning whatever he speaks, due to some speech defect or the conscious level, that comes under 3. Incomprehensible sounds, not even words, he just groans or moans or makes some sounds, that is score 2. If there is no response, it is 1. What about motor response? So you have got it now, 4, 5 and best motor response. How do you do this? You ask the patient to, what will you ask the patient to do in motor response? You will ask the patient to either lift your hand, right hand up or left hand up, leg up, or bend your leg towards you. Okay. That is, he obeys commands whatever you do. And first you will ask the patient to lift on his voluntarily. Then against resistance you will try. Okay. So that is how you score the motor response. So how do you score? Suppose you ask the patient to flex his hand towards him, then you will resist like this. So these resistance movements, again different thing, like in motor examination, that is different. I'm not talking about that. Generally when you ask a patient to lift, you apply resistance, okay, like this. If he's shifting laterally, then you will move like this, okay, like this. So best motor response, if he obeys commands to whatever you ask him, the score is 6. If he moves to localized pain, suppose you pinch and then he just just moves it, not even withdrawal, just moves it, then it is 5. Flexion withdrawal from pain, suppose like this, okay, he's just withdrawing it, then it is 4. Abnormal flexion, that is irrespective of what stimulation you give, he just flexes it like this, that is decorticate rigidity, okay, that score is 3. Abnormal extension, all the limbs, your upper limb and lower limbs all are extended, that is decerebrate rigidity, score is 2. So, and there is no response, how much ever pain stimulation you give to him, the deep pain stimulation or the sternal stimulation, how much ever you give, there is no response of motor, the score is 1. So, counting all this, suppose 4, 5 and 6 you count, the best response is 15. If he is comatose, that when you say he is comatose, when the score is 8 or less, when you count, so see, when you examine the patient, you start putting the score for eye opening, verbal response and motor response. Then he, depending on that, if the score is 8 or less, it is comatose. If it is less than 4 or 3, some books it's written 4, you will take it as 4 only, here it is written 3, the patient is considered as totally unresponsive. So how will you write the score as in the case sheet or while presenting? It is 3 out of 15, or when the best response is there, it is 15 out of 15. Okay. So when a CVA case approaches you in your emergency or casualty or in the ward, this is how you will score the patient or examine the patient. So how is it relevant in Viva? They'll ask you when you'll not be given a comatose patient or unconscious patient, okay? When you'll be given a paralyzed patient, they will be asking like this. If the patient is unconscious, they'll go like that only, they'll deviate the questions. Practicals, they won't be asking how you'll prepare for it, okay? Other than that, irrelevant questions, they will be deviating. So be prepared for everything, because nervous system is a very vast topic, okay? Then how will you measure for the what are the quantitative changes in consciousness? Okay, so as I mentioned for you, delirium, fluctuation of consciousness, or any confusion is there. What is delirium? Patient is disoriented in time and place and his attention span is brief. Okay, he won't be concentrating on you or whatever you say or whatever. Okay, fluctuation of consciousness. There is minimal disinterest and fuzziness in the head, which accompanies mild influenza, seen in case of influenza. Confusion, patient shows fluctuations in awareness with incoherence of thought and variable disorientation. Coming to memory, how do you test for memory? Memory is divided into 3 headings. You'll see for immediate, recent, and remote memory. Immediate memory, patient can repeat. What will you ask patient? How will you test immediate memory? Where you'll ask the patient to repeat 7 digits forward or 5 digits backwards. Okay. This, if he is, unless and until he is educated, remember. Okay. Recent, what was the breakfast or dinner? Just now, what did you have or whom did you talk to? That is recent. Okay. Remote, you'll ask about birthday or childhood or age of his parents. Okay, whichever is relevant. Okay, very easy questions you have to ask. Then If there is inability to grasp and retain images and ideas as a marked feature of acute toxic delirious reactions and psychosis. Loss of recent memory with preservation of past memory is the characteristic of Korsakoff's psychosis. Degree to which recent memory is lost is an index of severity of organic brain disorder. Complete or significant loss of memory occurs in dementia paralytica, cerebral atherosclerosis, and encephalitis. Coming to general intelligence, this you can skip it, as you can say, either you can involve it in memory, or you can say it as a separate topic. Okay, intellectual capacity of a patient is noted during history taking, so this is not relevant in examination. Usually necessary to ascertain the patient's general intelligence or how it has been affected by brain injury or disease. So as I told you before, what is mini mental score examination? Okay. So while telling about or mentioning about memory, they'll be asking you about this MMSE score. Okay. So this is a practical method for grading the cognitive state of patients. So the normal range of score depends upon the education the patient has received. Okay. Normal cutoff for uneducated people is 19. For graduates, it is 23. That is graduates of elementary or junior high school. Okay. It is 27 for high school graduates and 29 for college graduates. This is out of 30, 30. So what is the MMSE score? You'll say, they'll ask you, then you'll say, this is the score out of 30. So how did you know that? Those are the points. Okay. So this is not much important. When they ask you questions, you have to mention about, you should know about it. Okay. Usually a score of less than 23 for educated people is taken to indicate cognitive impairment, and in the case of uneducated patients, it is less than 18 or 14 out of 30. Okay. Limitations of the MMSE. The test is weighted towards orientation and language. Okay. So these elements form the 19 of the 30 score points. Can be normal in right hemisphere and frontal lobe damage. So you can't rule out. Okay. Abnormal score does not distinguish between focal and a diffuse disease of the brain. Coming to attention and calculation, how will you assess attention and calculation? What are the tests you'll ask the patient? Okay. Uh, there are two methods they'll ask. You can prefer any one of them. You'll ask serial 100 minus 7, and see, everyone can't say very spontaneously. You'll just say normally whether he can say it or not. Okay. Serial 100 minus 7 and the digit span are commonly used test for attention. Okay. So the serial 100 minus 7 is a part of MMSE only. Okay. So for digit span test, two methods are there. Either you'll ask the patient to read out clearly and slowly a series of number, and then you'll ask him to repeat. Start with 3 numbers and then increase by 1 each time until he makes consistent errors. Okay. It is wise to have written out the group of numbers beforehand. You write and show it to him, and then you ask, and then you increase one by one. Okay. The other digit span is like, you either ask the patient to count like 7 plus or minus 2, or backwards 5 plus or minus 1. Okay. So the forwards and backwards digit span, the difference after he does should not be more than 2. Okay. So normally it should be within 2. Speech I have uh, uh, discussed briefly over here, because it's a very vast topic, because it takes another 1 hour for speech, but I have kept it briefly. So speech is very important. They'll ask you questions on that. So what are the components of speech you'll see in the patient? These are the relevant questions they'll ask you, important questions. And the different pathological conditions of speech. Okay. And difference between them, that is, what is aphasia, what is dysarthria, what is dyslexia, what is the difference between dysarthria and aphasia, and what are the different types of aphasia, and etc. etc. Okay. So speech is very important, components of speech, and the main aphasias they'll ask you, in aphasia they'll ask you is Broca's aphasia as well as Wernicke's aphasia. Okay, so these two you should compulsory know what component of speech is impaired. Okay, so I'll tell you a nice mnemonic to remember the components of speech. Okay, I'll go into the details. So these are the few terms which they ask. Mutism. What is mutism? Patient is conscious but making no attempt to speak. This is, he's very well conscious, but you ask him to speak or something, he won't speak. That is deliberate. Or there might be a pathological also. Psychological disorders. Okay, mainly it is seen in psychological disorders. Lesions affecting the anterior part of the wall of the third ventricle and posterior medial surface of frontal lobe bilaterally. In these conditions, mutism is seen. So you shouldn't show it away saying that it's purely psychological. Okay. Patient is trying to speak, but he whispers. He can't speak more than particular decibels. That is aphonia. Where does it occur? Any disorders of larynx and vocal cords. Volume of sound and the content of speech is normal, but the articulation and enunciation, these two words you have to mention if the examiner asks you about dysarthria. Articulation and enunciation, articulation of the words and how do you enunciate it, how do you pronounce. Okay, that is important. If that is, these both are distorted, it is dysarthria. So his volume or his speech content which comes out, it's good, but he can't articulate the speech and enunciate properly so that we can't clearly understand. That is dysarthria. Where does it occur? It is seen in disorder of muscles producing speech. The lesion lying in the upper motor neuron or lower motor neuron, it can be due to any cerebellar disorders or even the muscles itself. Okay. So if the patient is put into properly constructed words or phrases, the thoughts he wishes to express, even if articulation is adequate. So this is the difference between aphasia and dysarthria. Okay, the fluency and comprehension is lost, but the articulation is there in aphasia. Okay, so the lesion is in the higher mechanism of speech, must be in dominant cerebral hemisphere. So aphasia states also include, so aphasia is not only loss of speech. The patient even can't write. These are the components of speech. Okay, even they can't write, or failure to comprehend the spoken word or the written word. You write to him and ask him, you just pronounce or tell me what this word is. He can't say. That is also comes under the aphasia. Okay, so that is, if there is disturbance of writing, it is dysgraphia. Failure to comprehend the spoken word, it is receptive aphasia, or the written word, it is dyslexia. Okay, so how do you examine the speech? Okay, you listen to him carefully initially. Even when the patient, you arrive or you approach to the patient or the patient approaches to you, you see for the gait, the stature, how he is standing there itself. Before the detailed examination is different. This is how you'll examine the patient. How do you examine the speech? You listen to him talking carefully. Okay, need not specifically ask him to speak. Whenever the patient is speaking to you, you examine you observe the quantity of speech. So you listen the consonants and vowels and pronunciation and all. Then you will ask the patient to tell British Constitution or Royal Devonshire. These are the words. But in India, we can't say these words. Depending on the education, you will ask him. Okay, Thiruvananthapuram. Okay, Muzaffarpur. You have to see how he pronounces it. Okay, so British Constitution will be British Constitution. Okay, this will be Royal Dorset, like that. Okay, so they can't pronounce it. Okay, then you'll ask the patient. These are the levels. Okay, depending if he can't say, he can't pronounce the, suppose he say British Constitution, no need to test the next two. There itself the leveling is done. Okay, so if he said this nicely, then you ask him to read a paragraph. You give the book and ask him to give a paragraph, read a paragraph. Then you ask him to count till 30 non-stop. Okay. So what will you see, as I told you before, what will you see while listening to the words? You look for any slurring and the rhythm, whether it is jerky or explosive. The speech is explosive or monotonous, like I am going to the class. That is monotonous. Explosive, he'll be shouting literally. This is there, the memory you have to see. Like, he'll be very excited and all. Jerky is like between gaps comes, okay? And you have to see whether the speech is loud or soft, that is muffled. Particular letters presenting with difficulty. What all letters he is not mentioning. Suppose you ask him to pronounce egg and he says eng. It is due to nasal intonation. Or so the three things are the lips, the tongue, and the larynx. These portions are the local areas of defects. Okay, from there, from which area it is coming, or which, that is what you see. Okay, nasal tone, as I told you, due to particular nasal, any regurgitation or any cranial nerve affecting, or any upper motor or lower motor neuron affected. Then disturbance is constant or intermittent or increasing or decreasing, whether the tone or this is all how you'll see. Okay, so it is going into the detail. So speech is you require another 1 hour. Okay, then you will see, as I told you, the correct coordination of the lips, the tongue, and the larynx, palate. Okay, and the muscles of respiration. Upper motor neuron, lower motor neuron, as I told you, these are the defect, and extra pyramidal system. These are the important systems affecting in the, that is how you'll think, the way you'll think whether the speech is affected. So is it due to upper motor neuron, lower motor neuron, or either the localized effect, or cerebellar dysfunction, or extrapyramidal system. Okay, extrapyramidal system and cerebellar you will see for the coordination tests. Okay, so I'll tell you about some conditions where you'll see the cerebellar dysarthria. It is the scanning speech. Okay, he speaks slowly, syllable by syllable, as if he's scanning the speech. Okay, and the flow of words is lost, and each word is given emphasis. Okay, pseudobulbar dysarthria, individual syllables are slurred and precision of consonant production is lost. So as I told you, here you'll ask the he'll be, if that British Constitution is lost, British Constitution, that is pseudobulbar dysarthria. What is aphasia? There is defect in the power of expression or comprehension. I have already mentioned about what is aphasia. Okay, comprehension by speech, writing, reading, or gesture. Remember, it is not only speech, reading, writing, as well as the gesture. Okay, so what are the components of speech you see? I told you, I'll tell you a mnemonic. A, F, C, D, R, L, E. A, F, C, D, R, L, E. A is for articulation, F is for fluency, C is for comprehension. So here a misnomer is there. L and D. D, R, L, E I have told you. So D and L is for, D is for, you can take it as reading, and L is for writing. Okay. So, and the other one is D, R, L, E. Reading, repetition, writing, and enunciation. Okay. So this is how, these are the components of the speech. So in any types of aphasia, particular component is lost. It will be easy to remember for you. A, F, C, D, R, L, E. Okay, don't forget. So, as I told you, this is how you will note the spontaneous speech, that is the patient's fluency. As I told you, you will see for the fluency, comprehension, naming, repetition, reading, and writing. Okay, how will you speak? How will you, spontaneous speeches, how you will ask the patient to speak? whether if he can speak, and rate and abundance of spontaneous speech, the note, the tonal modulation, whether there is any nasal tone involvement or anything, and any errors or any grammar mistakes are there. So if there is paraphasic errors, that is inappropriately substituted words or syllables, okay, that is paraphasic errors. If there is non-existent words, he speaks all irrelevant words, any new created words, okay, that is neologism. Or errors in grammar are present. Comprehension, whether the patient can understand simple questions and commands, whether he is able to comprehend it. You ask him to lift the glass, he is lifting. He is not able to understand that, then that is difficulty in comprehension. Naming, ask the patient to name some easy, like what is this? This is a pen, this is watch, something easy, okay, the fingernail or belt buckle, anything, or you show that stethoscope, that you can't ask the patient, you can't say it, anything simple like that, okay. Repetition, whether the patient can repeat the words and sentence without any ifs and buts, any gaps or something, okay. Reading, ask the patient to read single words and then you move on, brief paragraph and then the front page of the newspaper, and then you test for the comprehension. You ask him to read, you both testing the reading and the comprehension. Then writing, ask the patient to write their name and write a sentence, okay. So writing and reading is depending on the education level, which we have measured in the MMSE score, okay. Depending on that only you can ask. In uneducated patients, reading and writing you cannot test, okay. So I have only mentioned about a few aphasias. For example, Broca's aphasia is, so I told you na, AFCDRLE. In that, what is impaired in Broca's aphasia? Everything is impaired except for comprehension. He can understand. Broca's aphasia is motor aphasia. That is, or is also known as Motar's aphasia. I think you have already finished this in your class. You should be knowing it. So I'm just brushing it. Okay, Motar's aphasia mane motor defective is there. So all sensory component is good, but the motor component is defective. So fluency, repetition, naming, writing, reading, everything is impaired. Comprehension is normal in Broca's aphasia. He can understand you, but he cannot speak out, respond to you. Okay. Wernicke's aphasia. Wernicke's aphasia or sensory aphasia. What is it? Sensory component is defective, but motor component is good. So what is defective over here? Fluency is good, rest all is impaired. Okay, fluency is normal, comprehension, repetition, naming, writing, reading is impaired. So what is the other aphasias are conduction. There are so many global aphasia, conduction aphasia, transcortical aphasia. There are so many aphasia. So they'll ask you about Wernicke's and Broca's mainly. Okay, if you well answer it well and good, then they'll go into depth. Okay, conduction aphasia, here repetition is impaired, everything else is everything else here repetition is impaired. Transcortical aphasia, everything else is impaired except repetition is normal. Okay, anomic and aphasia, naming is impaired. Okay, when you ask the patient to name any object or anything, he cannot. Okay. Handedness, you can ask, take this in history, or whether the patient is right-handed. How do you test it? Right-handed or left-handed? How will you test the patient whether he is right-handed or left-handed? You ask him to pick an object, whichever hand approaches, that is his handedness. Okay, and while you'll ask the patient to stand like this, okay, cross hands, then whichever hand is top of his hand, that is the dominant hand. Okay, or when you stand back, you ask the patient, so whichever hand is on top, okay, that is the easy way to see whether this is how the examiner will ask you. You'll say he's right-handed or left-handed, then but how? So right-handed or left-handed. Right-handed person, the dominant hemisphere is on the left side and vice versa. Okay, this is how you'll test. So coming to cranial nerves examination. So I won't be cranial nerve examination is also a very detailed and very important and highly volatile. okay, how much ever you read. So you examine and then you read, study, okay, then you will be understanding, okay. So cranial nerves, as you know, I won't be going into the details of the pathway, the location of the nucleus, because all of you have presented your seminars. Okay, I hope you have concentrated on the seminars and you have read about it. So I won't be going into the subject or the lesions or anything detail. Okay, I'll be only purely talking about the examination. In other words, just brushing your knowledge. Even examination part also you have presented to us in the seminars. Okay. So, as you know, cranial nerves are 12 cranial nerves, and there are 12 pairs in all. They are to be examined thoroughly to detect any paralysis and to localize the site of lesion. Okay, the lesion might be supranuclear, nuclear, or infranuclear. Okay, so this you can create your own mnemonic. There are a number of mnemonics going on viral regarding this, how to remember cranial nerves. But eventually if you are examining in, no, when you examine in the patient or on your friends, okay, classmates, then you can remember it, or mnemonic wise while writing theory exams, that is up to you. But so these are the cranial nerves: olfactory, optic, oculomotor, trochlear, trigeminal, abducens, facial, vestibulocochlear, glossopharyngeal, vagus, spinal accessory, hypoglossal. Cranial nerve should be on the tip of your tongue. Okay, if what, how, I don't care how you'll remember it, whether it is mnemonic or by heart or anything. Whenever examiner asks you, you should be very spontaneous, no mistake. Even in the examination also, okay, you should be spontaneous. When the patient, when the examiner asks you, you should be able to comprehend very fast. Okay. Mm. Then, so coming to olfactory or cranial nerve one. Here, how do you test? So I'm, as I told you, I won't be discussing about its nucleus or pathway or anything. I hope you remember it, olfactory bulb and etc. So here, what will you do olfactory? How do you test the olfactory nerve? Each nostril should be tested separately. Either you will ask the patient to close his eyes or open his eyes. Okay. So what substances you will use? Here they have mentioned coffee or oil of cloves. Okay, whichever, it is not highly pungent smelling substances. It shouldn't dampen. Okay, you shouldn't use the pungent. They'll ask you why you are not supposed to use pungent. You'll say don't use, but why? It shouldn't dampen, then the patient cannot recognize the objects. Okay, so any mild, okay, like soap, toothpaste, you'll give the patient and you'll ask him whether you can, so better it is close eyes if you don't want the patient to see the objects. Okay, you can ask the patient. Exact method is close his eyes. Here there is, the patient hasn't closed, close his eyes and close one of his nostril, and you will test for the each nostril separately. Okay, so what will you elicit from this? You'll find out whether he can correctly identify the smell. Okay, coming to optic nerve. Detailed part of optic nerve you must have completed. You'll be very well aware and in detail in your third year. Okay, optic nerve. So I need not go into details. Okay, so what all you'll test, this you have to say the headings, what all you'll test and how you will test. Okay, vision acuity, acuity of vision, field of vision, color vision, and then finally appearance of fundus. Since you're undergraduates, they won't ask you to examine the fundus. Okay, but you should be knowing about this. Okay, how do you test for acuity of vision? It is either by Snellen's chart or Jaggers chart. That is for Snellen's for distant vision and Jaggers for near vision. Okay, how do you use a field of vision? These are the objects by measure. How do you measure yourself? Hmm? That I'll discuss. Okay, color vision is Ishihara's pseudo isochrome. You can say Ishihara's chart. Appearance of fundus you'll be seeing by fundoscopy. So Snellen's chart, as I told you, this is Snellen's chart. Most of you must have experience, and third year also you have ophthalmology full completely you have covered it up. Or this is the Ishihara's chart. Okay, so there is a crude test which you have to do in acuity of vision. That is, you ask, their finger counting should be done. Okay, you, that is bedside purpose. The hand is kept about 1 meter. Okay, you ask the patient how much this, okay, 1 meter distance from the patient, and then you move forward. If he can do it from 1 meter, then well and good, it is 6 by 6. Okay, so that is the finger counting test. Then you reach up to close your closer to his, then you can't appreciate the finger counting. Then what will you go for? Hand movement. Okay, HM. I hope you remember all this. Okay, HM, hand movement. Then if he can't even recognize that, then you go for projection of light. Then you can, whether he can recognize the, whether the light is falling on his eye or not. Okay, this is a crude method of testing visual acuity, bedside test. Otherwise it is Snellen's chart or Jaggers chart. Okay, coming to field of vision, this is the bedside test. I have kept you in the diagram. So the method, the other which ophthalmologist or any diagnostician measures is Goldman's perimeter or Lister's perimeter. But bedside test the examiners will ask you. So here the patient will be sitting opposite to you. How much distance? 1 meter distance. Okay. If the patient closes his left eye, okay, patient closes the left eye, the opposite eye of the examiner should be closed. This all the patient's field of vision compared with that of the examiner, presuming that examiner's vision, field of vision to be normal. Okay, this is important. So the examiner's field of vision should be normal. So you are comparing with the ideal person. Okay, so each eye must be tested separately. That is important. And then you close the eye, and then you will ask the, then you will, the examiner will bring the finger, okay, like this. Remember, all the books they'll be giving, they'll be showing like this. Only the finger should be flickering. Then you will see whether you will test, you'll ask, the patient will say where you are getting the flickering. Okay, so you'll test from this, from up to below, from below to up, inwards to outwards, and outwards to inwards. Okay, I hope you have understood. This is how you will measure. When the examiner will ask you how will you do the visual field test or how will you test, you have to tell this 1 meter distance, ask the patient to close his eye, and then you will do like this. Okay, so this is known as confrontation test. Okay, confrontation or confrontation test. So this tests the upper, lower, temporal and nasal field vision. Okay, coming to, so field of vision, they'll be asking you about the hemianopias. I hope you have read about it. Huh? You have presented me that optic nerve pathway. If they'll ask you regarding the optic nerve pathway and various lesions occurring in the different areas of optic nerve. Okay, so kindly read that. Okay, then finally fundoscopy. So what will you see in fundus? They'll ask you that, though you won't examine, they'll ask you what you'll see in fundoscopy. So you have to tell that you'll see optic disc, blood vessels, the macular region of the periphery should be examined regularly. Okay, so other than the color, shape, physiological cupping, edging of the disc and the surrounding, these are the things you will see: optic disc, blood vessels and the macular region and the periphery of the macular region. I hope you remember the diagrams in your Kurana book, what book you have read for ophthalmology. Okay, next coming to, so as you know, third, fourth and sixth cranial nerves are taken together. Why? They'll ask you why. Why are you examining three together? Because they together innervate these extraocular muscles. So extraocular muscles is a group. You can't examine each muscle, and so they grouped these three cranial nerves for the easier way. Okay. So that is why you examine 3, 4 and 6. Then they ask you, you tell like this. So what all you'll see in 3, 4, 6 cranial nerves? What are the cranial nerve? 3 is oculomotor, cranial 4 is trochlear, cranial 6 is abducens. Okay. So what all you'll see? Ptosis, movement of eyeball. Ptosis means whether there is drooping of the upper eyelid or the eyelid. Okay. Then you will see for the movement of the eyeball in all directions. So how will you see? How will you see? You'll ask the patient. This is also same. Okay. No need to close. You just will tick like this, and then you will ask the patient to see this side, that side, up, above, oblique, like this, like this. See, I hope you can see like this, like this, like this, like this. Okay, these are the directions, remember. Okay, so movement of the eyeball. Don't stop up, down, sideways, medial and lateral. Even the oblique directions also you have to test. Okay. So here movement of the eyeball. So these are the headings you will see in 3, 4 and 6, and then you will see for whether there is any nystagmus. What is nystagmus? It is rhythmic. I am not going into detail. Okay, it's rhythmic, conjugate, involuntary eye movements, and it may be horizontal or vertical or rotatory. Okay. So any cranial nerve they ask you to examine, and then they will go into details. Okay. They'll stop you in between. They won't stop until the end. Okay. Then you'll see the examination of the pupils. What will you see in pupils? Size, shape, how it reacts to light, reaction to light. What are the two tests? Consensual and direct and consensual, and then you will see for the accommodation reflex. So in this all accommodation reflex, there are different questions they'll ask you is Argyll Robertson pupil, Addy's pupil. Okay. Unilateral dilated fixed pupil, where what are the conditions? Okay, and then ultimately you'll see for the double vision or diplopia. Okay, then coming to the, so these are the, this picture shows you the different muscles. Okay, medial rectus, see, medial rectus, lateral rectus, inferior, superior, superior oblique and inferior oblique. You have to remember the movements. They'll ask you. So here easily you can see LR. This is a mnemonic actually, worldwide known mnemonic. All cranial nerves are supplied by oculomotor nerve except for LR6 SO4. LR6 is lateral rectus by 6th nerve and superior oblique by 4th nerve. Okay. So this is a picture showing you the red pin test. They might ask you about this when they when you mention about double vision or diplopia, that is red pin test. Okay, you move in a H pattern. Okay, so here the patient will see two pins. Okay, there are different types of tests in diplopia. For you, you have to know about the red pin test. Just mention about it. How if you can tell about the procedure. They'll ask you only regarding what test is it. Okay. So coming to cranial nerve 5, trigeminal nerve. So as you know, you can talk it as V1, V2, V3, or that is 5-1, 5-2, 5-3, but they tell it as V1, V2, V3, or ophthalmic, maxillary and mandibular branches. So in this, mandibular is sensory, both sensory and motor, other two are purely sensory. So what all you will see in trigeminal nerve, what all you will see, you will test for sensation. Okay, what all? Trigeminal nerve supplies over here, then corneal reflex, then over here. So corneal reflex, where will you keep the wisp of cotton? That they'll ask you at the limbus of the conjunctiva. Okay, So then so this is the sensory part. Then they'll ask you the motor part. How you will test the motor part of the trigeminal nerve? So it supplies the temporalis and zygomaticus, then masseter, then pterygoid muscles. Okay, then how will you test it? Anything, remember, you have to clench the teeth. Okay, see, they'll grit, not even clenching, it is gritting. Then you'll keep the hand on the patient's forehead like this. Then the muscle will be moving. We'll see for the paralysis or not. Okay. Then masseter. Then like this. Then you can feel the muscle. You should feel yourself. Okay. Then you will test for the pterygoids. How will you test for the pterygoids? The placement of hand on the patient's face is important here. Okay. Here. Okay. Like this. Resistance, and whichever side he is moving, you will keep resistance. Okay. So what will you see in this? Will keep resistance. What will you see? He can't move to that opposite to the resistance, and there might be protrusion of the jaw. Okay, abnormal protrusion of the jaw. Then, as I told you, you will see for the corneal reflex and jaw jerk. Jaw jerk, you can mention it in the 5th cranial nerve examination or in the reflexes elicitation. Anywhere you can mention. Okay, better you mention in reflexes, but I'll talk about jaw jerk. Jaw jerk, how will you test? You'll ask the patient to open his mouth half, this much. Then you'll place your left index finger, okay, on the crease below the lower lip, or if there is no crease, on the lower jaw. Then you will, in the knee hammer, you will just, okay, the movement should be, you know how to elicit a reflex, a jerk? The movement should be at the wrist, okay? So you do like this, then he will, this is the, so is there any response in jaw jerk for normal patients? No. Okay, there is no response. So the exaggeration of the jaw jerk indicates, I think you know it. The lesion will be in pseudobulbar palsy. Okay, I am not going into details of the lesions and everything because the class will be extended. Okay. So coming to the 7th cranial nerve, facial nerve, this is very, very important. You will be given a short case and you will be asked about the details. Remember, even if they give you a short case of Bell's palsy, you don't expect that they'll ask you only about facial nerve. They'll ask you about other cranial nerves. Okay, they'll go into the root value pathways or the associated cranial nerves. Okay, then they'll go into the detail subsequently. So you should know about each and every cranial nerve. Okay, the nucleus, the location of the nucleus, the pathway, the localization of site and localization of the lesion, and how you examine the cranial nerve, and the conditions where the particular nerve is affected. These are that is how you will write down and you will learn. Okay. Facial nerve, there is motor, sensory and autonomic. Motor part, as I told you, the facial nerve supplies all the facial muscles. Posterior belly, this is important, platysma and posterior belly of digastric. This is the motor component. Sensory part takes to the anterior 2/3 of the tongue, ear canal. Then posterior 1/3 is supplied by, I have already asked you in the seminar. Okay. So the anterior 2/3 of the tongue, ear canal and post-auricular. So how do you assess? You look at the face. Is there any drooping? Is there any absence of nasolabial fold? And the facial contour, how is it? Then you ask the patient to elevate the eyebrows. This picture shows the each and every examination you will do in facial nerve. You will ask the patient to raise his eyebrows like this. Then you'll see the frowning or no frowning. You have to see that. Then you ask the patient to scrunch his eyes very tightly, and then you have to try to open the scrunched eyes against resistance. Okay, you have to open. Then you will ask the patient to reveal the teeth. Then what will you see? Whether there is any deviation of mouth to right or left. Then you will ask the patient to blow. Just blow against a closed mouth. Okay. So what all muscles are involved here? That they'll ask you. If you see the wrinkles, then what is the muscle involved? Occipitofrontalis. Wrinkling of the forehead is caused by occipitofrontalis. Then this one, orbicularis oculi. Okay. Then clenching of teeth, what muscles is there? Buccinator muscle. Buccinator muscle you will see in blowing of cheeks. Sorry, buccinator you will see in here. Not masseter. Masseter is supplied by trigeminal. Buccinator. Then you ask the patient to blow. Okay, orbicularis oris. Orbicularis oris. This is oculi. Okay, and buccinator you have to see. Okay. Then taste sensation, as I told you, how will you, so then they'll ask you, how will you test? You have tested you'll say facial now, taste sensation is normal in this patient. How have you tested? They'll ask you. Okay. You will ask the patient, you will protrude his tongue and you will hold it with a gauze piece. It is very uncomfortable for the patient, so you have to explain to the patient. That's what you'll say to the examiner. We'll explain the procedure to the patient, and then you'll hold the tongue with the gauze piece, and then you will start putting the substances which you have to test. So what all you'll test? Salt, sweet, salt, sour and bitter. So in this, you'll use strong solutions of sugar, salt, and then citric acid and quinine respectively. Okay, for sure. So in this, the quinine should be applied last. Why? Because its effect lasts and it is permanent for a longer time. So you start by sweet, salt, citric, or any of these three mix. You can start anything, but quinine should be always last because this will tamper with the other taste sensations. Okay. So how do you test it? A glass rod, dip it in that solution, and then you put it. Okay. And then you have to clean each time the glass. This all the procedure you have to tell. The examiner will ask you in detail. Okay. Then as I told you, facial contour and all, everything you will see. That is how you test for the facial nerve. Then we enter into the vestibulocochlear nerve. Okay. Vestibulocochlear nerve, you see for the hearing and balance. So what here? So vestibular part is the balance, cochlear part is the hearing. So this is you have learned started learning from physiology way back in first year. So I need not go into the detail. Here I'll mention about the crude hearing test. Whisper double digit number. Okay, you'll whisper. How will you whisper? There is a watch test also. That also they'll ask you. Old examiners will ask you about the watch test and the whispering test. You will go back of the patient and then you will whisper in his ear. Okay, suddenly which ear, don't tell him. Just surprising thing. Okay, just whisper and you will see whether he can hear or not. Then see for the hearing loss. Okay, whether it's sensory or this is a spelling mistake. It is Rinne's test. RINNE, you know Weber, and you see for Romberg's you will see for here because there is a vestibular part, balance related. Okay, so that is in presence of Meniere's disease and all, you have to see. You can test Romberg's over here, but don't mention it over here. Romberg's will be mentioning it in cerebellar tests. Okay. So I need not go into detail, I guess. Rinne's test, you know. So here the main factor is air conduction is more than bone conduction. So air conduction is much more than bone conduction in the case of, then the Weber's test. This is the lateralization. It depends on the lateralization. Okay, I'm not going into the detail. Coming to the cranial nerve 9, glossopharyngeal. So motor part is pharyngeal muscles and the sensory part to the posterior 1/3 of the tongue, as I asked you before. Pharynx, tonsils, tympanic membrane and posterior ear canal is also supplied. Okay. So how do you assess glossopharyngeal? How do you assess? You ask to open the mouth and say ah, and you see the movement of the uvula. If the movement of uvula is to the one side, that is not the paralyzed side, the other side is a paralyzed. Okay, it moves to the stronger part. Okay, Gag, then you also see gag reflex you can mention over here as well as the vagus nerve, or you can examine the both 9 and 10 cranial nerves together. Okay. So this is a picture showing how you will see. Okay. Cranial nerve 11, spinal accessory. Here you will see for sternocleidomastoid and trapezius. How will you see? First, trapezius is you'll put resistance over here and you'll ask the patient to shrug like this. Okay. Again, see, this picture is for trapezius. Sternocleidomastoid is similar, so don't get confused between how to test pterygoids and sternocleidomastoid. Pterygoids, you will see whether he can move the jaw or not. This sternocleidomastoid, you will ask the patient to shoot. Okay, so the muscle, the particular muscle on the opposite side will be prominent. Okay. Coming to cranial nerve 12 in the last, hypoglossal. This applies to tongue. Look for any way. So you simple test. You'll ask the patient to protrude the tongue. Protrusion of tongue itself is, suppose if there is bilateral paralysis, the patient cannot protrude his tongue. Okay, you'll see it in the oral cavity itself. So you'll ask the patient to protrude his tongue and you'll see whether there is any wasting or any deviation or any fasciculations. The tongue will be tremulousness of the muscles of the tongue. Okay. Thank you. So I'm done with only mental function and cranial nerves. Next class, they'll be discussing about the subsequent topics, motor system, sensory system. So kindly read and come, then it will be easier for you. Okay, motor system, you have to know about the sensory system, you have to know the dermatomes and dermatome supply and everything. Okay, and both upper limbs and lower limbs, trunk muscles and everything. Okay, so kindly read. You might be familiar with the, while reading you might be familiar, but you have to know the spontaneity of your action before the examiner is very important. Okay. Okay, thank you.